We're here today with another installment of 3 on 3. Today we're talking about stainless steel sport watches with integrated bracelets. It's a category that started in the 70s and has become kind of iconic, something a lot of watch guys really aspire to have. So if you can tell us kind of where this idea came from, and then we'll introduce the watches we have today.
Sure. Well, the impetus originally for getting these three particular watches together was one that you have in front of you. It's the new Piaget Polo S. It started a conversation between you and I about a whole sort of history of integrated bracelet sports watches in general, and steel integrated bracelet sports watches in particular. And of course, if we look at the history of such watches, the hero, the superhero, so to speak, is really the Royal Oak. But the integrated bracelet stainless steel luxury sports watch is really something that emerged very late in the history of watchmaking. And to a certain degree, everything kind of stems from the Royal Oak, and every watch in that family pays homage to the Royal Oak.
Including the watch you have in front of you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
what watch is that?
So this is the new Vacheron Constantin Overseas. It is the third revision of the Overseas design, which first appeared in 1996.
So before we get too deep into the story of the Overseas, maybe we should go back to the beginning of the entire category, which starts with that watch, or at least a predecessor of that watch. So can you tell us where the Royal Oak comes from?
So the original Royal Oak comes out in 1972. It is the first high-end sports watch. It was designed by a man called Gerald Genta, and Gerald Genta was a virtuoso in design. And this was a game changer for Audemars Piguet. They were suffering at the time. This was a bold, bold design for Audemars Piguet, but also for the industry. The industry hadn't seen anything like it before.
You said that this was kind of bold at the time. Can you compare this to what else was coming out in watchmaking at the time and why this would have been so shocking?
What was most shocking about it when it came out, you had sports watches at that time. But what was most shocking was the price tag, in fact. This was a watch that was more expensive than most gold watches that came out in 1972.
And it was all steel.
And it was all steel.
It was over $3,000, which was quite a lot in 1972, which was a tremendous amount of money.
This one's a little bit more expensive.
Prices have gone up.
But at the time, it would have been quite shocking. And really, it's down to the engineering of the bracelet and the finishing on the bracelet and the case.
And also the movement inside.
And the movement inside. At the time, AP was using a Jaeger-LeCoultre movement, caliber 920, if I'm...
Yes, the version that AP used, it's the same movement, they just called it caliber 2120. The watch that I've been given an opportunity to talk about today is the new Vacheron Constantin Overseas Automatic. It is part of the relaunch of the Overseas family, which was the big news from Vacheron Constantin in 2016. It's a very, very classically proportioned, classically styled stainless steel sports watch, to the extent that you can say that about stainless steel sports watches. 41 millimeters in diameter, 11 millimeters thick. It's actually the thickest of the three watches that we have here. The movement inside has been developed by Vacheron for this watch, although I'm sure we'll see it other places as well. It's a new self-winding movement caliber 5100, quite a long power reserve at 60 hours. And it's a fairly conventional movement in terms of construction, although it is a Geneva seal movement, which means that it has to adhere to certain minimum requirements as specified by the Geneva seal. So you see the sort of level of finish that you would expect in a movement from Vacheron Constantin. The transitions between brushed and polished surfaces and the movement are terrific. The steel work is fantastic. Overall, just a very, very beautifully done, very, very impressive watch, but in a quiet sort of way, which is, again, what you would expect from a luxury sports watch from Vacheron. Oh, and lest we forget, it's the party trick of the new Overseas collection and of this watch is the interchangeable strap bracelet system. So here it is as simple as pressing a little tab on the back of the bracelet and lifting gently upwards, and voila. You can put either a rubber strap or an alligator strap, both of which come with the watch, onto the new Overseas. And the price, this is the most expensive of the three watches that we're looking at, more than twice as expensive as the Piaget Polo S, and it is also a couple of $1,000 more expensive than the Royal Oak at $19,900.
So I guess then the next logical step is to take a look at the Polo S before we return to the Royal Oak and kind of look back at how these two newer iterations relate to the latest iteration of the Royal Oak. So what we have here is the latest Polo. And this Polo is meant to be a mass market sports watch for Piaget. Piaget typically produces ultra thin dress watches and high complications. And this is the other side of the brand. It's a steel sport watch. It's not technically an integrated bracelet sport watch. It does have end links on this bracelet that can be removed, and it's the only watch of the three we have here that could take an OEM strap if you wanted it to. The case is 42 millimeters. It has this wide, kind of almost TV-shaped bezel, which is brushed horizontally on the top and is polished and beveled on the edges. That brings us down into the dial. There's a minutes track at the outer edge where the blue is flat, and then we start getting this horizontal texture. The hour markers are set directly on top of that and are filled with lume, as are the hands. The second hand is not filled with lume and has a P-shaped counterweight, and there's also an asymmetrical date window down at 6 o'clock. Inside this watch, though, is something really impressive, and that's a new in-house movement from Piaget. It's the caliber 1110P. It's an evolution of their 800P caliber. It's only 4 millimeters thick, and it's 25.58 millimeters across. You have this kind of circular graining, a darkened rotor. The finishing is certainly nice. It's far above, I think, what you'll find for most watches in this price range. This watch comes in at $9,350 US. That is far below what either of the watches we have on either side of this are priced at. It takes that steel luxury sport watch that's typically more in the 15 to 25,000 price range and brings it under 10,000, making it accessible to a whole new audience. So up until this point, we've talked about the Royal Oak as the foundation for all of this, and as a historical reference, and as an idea, really. Can you just run us through what this Royal Oak is?
So this is reference 15400. We've had it since 2012. It replaced reference 15300. It's a little bit larger than that reference. It's 41 millimeters versus 39. Otherwise, it's the same caliber inside, caliber 3120, which is arguably one of the finest base movements that Audemars Piguet makes. And I think a lot of people will say that at 41 it's a little bit big. It did not bother me at all. It's also quite slim, 9.8 millimeters, which makes it slimmer than the Overseas and slightly larger than the Polo S. So it's actually a very, very wearable watch. At least I thought so. It's very well finished, as you'd expect. It's the archetypal Royal Oak otherwise. A Grand Tapisserie, dial, octagonal bezel. One thing I don't think a lot of people realize is that the hour markers in the hands are actually in white gold. And it's those finer details that really makes the Royal Oak what it is today. On the other side, you have a sapphire caseback that shows off the caliber 3120. It's got snailed and beveled bridges, a 22 karat gold rotor that is 110 degrees as opposed to 180 degrees. I think that's quite a nice feature as well. The steel work is impeccable, as you'd expect from Audemars Piguet and the Royal Oak. This is something that they've been doing since 1972, lest we forget. The price of the watch is $17,800, which is almost twice as much as the Polo S and a little bit under the Overseas.
Ultimately, though, we can talk about this all day. There's one question. Which watch would you buy? Arthur?
So ultimately, the watch that I want to wear is not necessarily the watch that has the best backstory or the most legitimate backstory or the one that has the longest power reserve. It's the watch that puts the biggest smile on my face, and that's the Royal Oak.
Jack?
I mean, for me, the choice among these three watches, leaving pricing considerations aside and just looking at them from from a design and sort of smile on your face standpoint, for me, it's the Vacheron. I appreciate the Royal Oak very much for what it is, and I think that the Piaget is a great design and it's going to be very fun to wear for whoever buys it. But the Vacheron really, it really has me. And for me, wearing the Vacheron is really, it's a connection to a very, very interesting, very real part of the history of the development of stainless steel sports watches. But it's also just, I just like it, I guess.
You're allowed. You're allowed to just like it.
And I mean, what's the old saying? The heart has its reasons whereof reason knows nothing. I just like the Vacheron.
So I'm going to have to go with the Vacheron as well. It's not perfect. I don't love the bracelet links. There are some other little things about it that I would change if I could. But I think overall it represents an interesting development from a modern manufacturer that I don't think gets as much credit as it deserves, kind of in the pantheon of watchmaking. It's a fun watch to wear. It's comfortable. It's got that combination of just like rugged everyday durability and kind of beautiful haute horlogerie finishings and movement making.